What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review James Cameron's Avatar: The Way of Water. It's a big, giant movie, and there's a lot to discuss. So the way I'm going to break down this video is as follows. Initially, no spoilers. I'll save anything specific for the end. And then I'm just going to break down my impressions to the good, the bad, my box office predictions, and then I'm going to rank every film by James Cameron. But before I say anything, let me just say it first. I'm rooting hard for this movie to succeed. The movie business desperately needs a big win. When it comes to the entertainment landscape, movie theaters have a massive problem. There are far too few movies for people to choose from, and most of them completely suck. And I know a lot of people roll their eyes when they hear about preserving the theatrical experience, and I totally get it. More often than not, the movie is subpar, and the audience is subpar, and the theater is subpar. You've got people on their phones, people talking, the theater's dirty, there's poor service, or there's bad projection, or just the movie sucks. I get it. But there's something about the theatrical experience that makes movies last in our consciousness in ways where they just don't when they're just a streaming movie. The way people used to say, oh, that movie's just a rental back in the days of VHS, it basically meant the movies were more disposable. But there's something about investing your time and your energy to go to a theater and share the experience with other people. It just makes it part of our cultural heritage in ways that streaming movies lack. And so while I often have really bad experiences at the theater, I do believe in quote unquote preserving the theatrical experience. However, I hate using that word because we shouldn't have to preserve it. The theaters and the studios should make such a compelling case as to why seeing a movie in the theater matters that there's no place we'd rather be than at the theater throwing down our cash. It shouldn't be something we have to support. It should be something that we're dying to do. So the question is, does Avatar: The Way of Water pull that off? So let's start with the good. I went into this with very low expectations because I'd watched all the trailers and I kept saying, like, where are the fights? Where are the villains? Where's the conflict? What are the heroes going to have to overcome? And what's ironic is that we always complained about how trailers reveal way too much, kind of spoiling the movie ahead of time. Well, these trailers did exactly that. They saved all the best for the screen, so it just shows how illogical and demanding audience members can be when we scream about trailers revealing too much. However, when they don't, we say, well, the movie looks terrible. At any rate, I went into this movie with very low expectations, but James Cameron has delivered a level of spectacle on a scale that most filmmakers never dream of. And best of all, this is his world. Whether you love it or hate it or you're indifferent, no one can complain about his interpretation of the material or what he's doing with somebody else's creations from a long time ago. There's no culture war baggage or bullshit. It's just, do you like it or do you not? This is James Cameron's world. Take it or leave it. But I love seeing a blockbuster. I love seeing a giant event movie where you don't have to have this endless political infighting over the fate of all civilization and where our culture's going, all that crap that just drives me crazy, none of which actually helps the movie business in any way, shape, or form. And I feel like this movie is just a testament to the power of a filmmaker coming up with their own idea and doing their best to tell the story in as grand a fashion as humanly possible. And admittedly, it's because James Cameron has the track record of all his past successes that allows him the luxury of telling his stories his way. But I would love to see more filmmakers saying things like, I want to build my own world the way Cameron did with Avatar, as opposed to saying, hey, I've got a hot new take on how to do The Flash. Like, I'd rather see somebody invent a new character or a new world that's just as compelling as the things that they've loved from the past. So continuing with the good, this movie features by far the best action scenes of the year, and I don't think another blockbuster out there even comes close. Most blockbuster movies, whether you're talking about movies from Universal or Disney or Warner Brothers or whomever, the action scenes seem so limp and so unambitious and just so uninspired. I think James Cameron would have to close his eyes and try real hard not to shoot a great action scene. He's got a lot of experience. He's been showing us how to do it right for close to 40 years at this point. And while this movie is very long and it's not all action, when the action scenes start, you're like, oh my God, yes, I'm watching a James Cameron movie. He has still fucking got it. And I'd heard some reviews in advance saying that the character of Neytiri, played by Zoe Saldana, had been kind of sidelined in this movie. She might not have as much screen time as she did in the first one. However, when it comes to action, she has by far the coolest action scenes of any character in the movie. So if you want to see Zoe Saldana as a big giant blue alien, beating the fuck out of people and just skewering them with a bow and arrow, this is the movie for you. But continuing with more of the good, when you see these characters in close-up, particularly when they come out of the water, I've never seen visual effects that are on this level. The level of detail, the level of realism. I had to try hard to remind myself these are blue aliens that were created on computer. They're not real, but I could not believe how good the special effects were. And we're living in an era right now where I know a lot of special effects experts are overtaxed and they're being worked to the breaking point, and there are too many movies and shows that need them, and so just a very tough time to be in their shoes. Well, whoever James Cameron recruited for this film, I believe it was Weta Digital, they did some of the most awe-inspiring special effects that I've ever seen in any movie ever. Now, I know it sounds like I'm only underlining the good parts of the movie, but I have one or two more things to say before I get to the bad. The kids in this movie, there's a whole new generation of characters that all have their own little adventures throughout the movie, and you can really feel the family vibe. The Sullys, they stick together. Every member of the family has a cool little role to play. The father, the sons, the daughters, the mother. I'm always skeptical anytime a big franchise starts to employ a lot of kid characters as opposed to the adults, but I have to admit that James Cameron pulled it off. Another compliment, well, this might not be a compliment, it's a mixed compliment. The movie at times feels like a highlight reel of ingredients from some of his most popular movies. There are scenes where whoa, those are the Marines from Aliens. Or whoa, that reminds me of one of the underwater sequences from The Abyss. Oh, that's identical to some of the scenes from Titanic. So for James Cameron enthusiasts who know his filmography really well, I don't know if it'll feel like a retread or more like a sentimental journey through all the highlights of his best movies. And my last compliment would be that this is one of those movies that shows that blockbusters still matter. They still have a role to play in our society. I think alongside The Batman and Top Gun Maverick, these are my three favorite giant, colossal blockbuster entertainments of the year. And I feel like these blockbusters now, they're so expensive and there's so much money at risk and there's so much on the line that they can't afford to take any risks of any kind, or sometimes they'll take the wrong risks. And anyway, when these movies backfire, they backfire so horribly, it can ruin entire friggin' studios that have been around for decades. But when they work, they are still so much goddamn fun to watch. So this year gave us plenty of crummy blockbusters, but I think at a minimum, Avatar: The Way of Water, Top Gun Maverick, and The Batman showed that blockbusters still matter to movie fans. But now let's switch gears and let's talk about the bad. All right, let's start with an easy one. The length. The movie is 3 hours and 12 minutes, which I have no problem with if a movie earns it. I've seen many a long movie out there, whether you're talking about Lawrence of Arabia or The Godfather, where you're like, oh my God, can I just stay in this world forever? This movie could have easily been an hour shorter, and I would have not missed any of the sequences that I, in my infinite wisdom, would have cut. There are a lot of really lengthy sequences where you just have kind of chanting music going on in the background amidst these kind of Lolo Granola montages, and it's a lot of, you can call it hippie, you can call it kumbaya, you can call it whatever you like, but it gets very repetitive. And I think in small doses it's fine, but after a while you're just like, I get it. The natives of this planet live in harmony with the planet. It's a wonderful, beautiful thing. But do I really need an hour of them just staring at fish with big smiles on their faces? You made your point. Let's get the story going. So I will definitely see this movie again. I think I saw the first Avatar 3 times in the theater. I will see this movie again on the biggest screen possible, IMAX 3D, etc., but not right away. And while we mentioned IMAX 3D, my feelings toward the format are mixed, because James Cameron obviously gets it, and he puts in the time, the care, and the attention to do it right. But I feel like after the first Avatar came out, it launched this whole 3D craze, which I think on the whole was a resoundingly negative one, where you had movies that were not shot in 3D, they were not intended for 3D, but suddenly they're being projected in 3D, and they were just dim and murky, and you couldn't see a goddamn thing, and you're fucking around with these gross-ass greasy glasses that have somebody else's fucking face mess on it the whole time, and I hated the whole 3D renaissance that got started after Avatar, and there's a reason why it went away, because people felt like they were being gouged for much more expensive tickets for a much less satisfying theatrical experience. And admittedly, when it's done right, like Alita Battle Angel. I went to see Alita Battle Angel, which was produced by Cameron a few years back at the nicest theater in New York with the glasses and everything. I was like, oh, this is why the format is so important to him. But the reality is that's a 1 in 100 experience. So unless a bunch of other filmmakers are going to operate in good faith the way that Cameron does, I'm happy to see 3D go away forever. All I need is IMAX and or 70 millimeter. Give me a big, giant, beautiful image with great resolution and great sound, and I'm totally fine. I don't need 3D. But getting back to the flick itself, another area that I thought was a glaring weakness was the dialogue. And if you want to be kind, you can call it clumsy or obvious or simplistic. But I think right around the time of the movie Titanic, you could tell that James Cameron's interest in dialogue, whatever interest he may have had at one point, started to slip and fade. In this screenplay, he shares screenwriting credit with Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver, and you can tell they were much more preoccupied with telling the story visually, which I totally get. It is a visual, epic spectacle. But the writing is, I always like to say, like, apart from paying for the writer's salary, it's the easiest part of the movie making experience. It's just all you need is a piece of paper and a pencil or a laptop, and you're off to the races, and you can make changes really, really quickly and cheaply and easily. And if you were to marry the visual splendor of this movie with the narrative complexity of like a great classic science fiction novel, or even a new story with the narrative complexity of a great science fiction novel, I mean, you would have an experience unlike anything human beings have ever seen. Or who knows, maybe I'm a total idiot, and maybe if you tried to marry the blockbuster with that level of narrative complexity, you would have giant flops that are totally inaccessible and totally opaque to most movie-going audiences. So James Cameron, obviously at this point, the box office and the awards speak for themselves. He knows how to deliver hit movies that are crowd pleasers. But for my money, I love the action, I love the visual sweep and splendor, but the dialogue is borders on comical at times. And I think whether or not you like the individual characters basically boils down to, do they look cool in action? Like when they strike a pose, whether it's with a gun or bow and arrow or they're riding a sea monster or whatever, the characters that look the coolest become the ones that we like. And that includes some of the bad guys that are avatars in this, where they're like wearing shades and have like shaved heads. Like mixing that Marine Corps aesthetic with the avatars is really, really cool to see with the villains. But as a result, I feel like Stephen Lang is the only actor who really comes away from this movie where you're going to remember his character. You're going to be engaged with this character. He's actually one of the few that has contradictions, one of the few that has kind of like larger than life flaws, but also really interesting, dynamic kind of villain beats. And yeah, I just found him to be great, whereas the rest of the cast, they were basically wasted on this movie. And I feel like the best gauge of whether or not you love the cast of characters or not would be if somebody were to put a gun to your head and say, name 5 characters in the Avatar franchise. I'd be like, Jake. I mean, my brains would end up all over the lens of my laptop. The characters are paper thin at best, but once again, if they look cool in action, then you get engaged. Which leads me to my next complaint. This world that James Cameron has created, it's all surface. There's no depth. I give 0 shits about the lore or the history or the background. It's just the intoxicating eye candy, like the chocolate for the eyes. I mean, the movie just, it doesn't wash over you, like stampedes over you in terms of what you're seeing. There's nothing else out there like it. But like, let's compare that to something like the world created by George R. R. Martin, his world of Westeros. When you read those books, A Song of Ice and Fire, that is a narrative in that world. But then he'll publish something like Fire and Blood, which is the backdrop, all the lore, the history of that world. And with a really great fictional setting, I'm always sometimes even more hungry for the lore than I am for the actual story itself. Like, look at Tolkien. The Lord of the Rings is the story, the Silmarillion is the history, and it's the history that I really love revisiting over and over again. Nobody's going to be publishing a giant book about the history of this world. Nobody cares. All people want is the roller coaster ride. Now, as far as spoilers go, and if you don't want spoilers, or if you've not yet seen it, go away, because I'm going to talk about 1 or 2 details there's not a ton to discuss, but I did like I guess the the evolution of the character of Kiri, played by Sigourney Weaver, and how we're now seeing characters who basically have, powers where they're connected to the world and can use that connectivity with the world to make it do things on their behalf. I thought that was really interesting, and it just shows how maybe this world can continue to evolve and grow in ways where it's not just a rehash or a repeat of the indigenous people against the human invaders over and over and over again. Because if he's going to keep making these movies or making more of them, he's going to need some new twists, some new directions for the stories to go. So that was interesting to me. But how do I say this? I have mixed feelings towards just the look of all the characters in this, where they're all basically nude, but they all have like weird little like jewels or leather straps, like just kind of like barely like covering their nipples, whatever. And I'm like, either put some fucking clothes on them or just let them be nude. But it's like the whole time you're seeing basically an entire planet full of nude people running around. I don't, maybe that's just me, but it always, I feel like he's trying to have it both ways, and he's not really successfully pulling it off either way. But the characters just, they kind of look fucking weird. And when they're in the middle of action and they're snarling and baring their teeth, they look so fucking cool. But when they're just walking around and interacting with humans and like putting their hands on the shoulders, I still think these aliens look a little weird. And one last spoiler, James Cameron needs to come up with more complex reasons as to why the humans keep coming back to this world. This time it's all about the whaling industry and how they're these giant whale-like creatures that have this little chemical in their brain where if you extract it and you drink it, it makes you effectively immortal. But it's like this weird little like 20-second throwaway piece of exposition to explain all these other action scenes. And it's like, I don't know, I feel like, once again, he needs to hire just a really cool, like gripping science fiction master to help create a more compelling, more complex universe, one with more nuance. Everything is like so binary in this, where it's either totally evil or totally pure, and never the twain shall meet. And it just makes the movies feel very simplistic, like they're for children, as opposed to people who really love the science fiction genre. But once again, who knows? If you made these stories any more complex, maybe they wouldn't be as successful. So let's get into some box office predictions. I don't think this movie is going to make as much money as the first Avatar, just because the first Avatar was a brand new experience, unlike anything people had ever had before. And people just used to go to the movies more than they do now. And I don't want to hear anybody say that, oh, people are still afraid of the global pandemic, because when Spider-Man Far From Home or No Way Home came out last year, everybody showed up in droves, like nobody cared. And when Top Gun Maverick came out earlier this year, people showed up in droves. I think it's just an easy excuse when a movie fucking sucks and underperforms it. Oh, well, the pandemic is still like, the box office is not coming back. Maybe make better movies and people will go. And I think I like The Way of Water better than the first Avatar, but just the novelty is now worn off. But I'm reading this article here on Deadline, and they're predicting that it'll have a global opening of 525 million, with somewhere between like 150 and 175 here in the United States. I wouldn't be surprised if in the United States that it outperforms that. Like if it opened somewhere around 200 million in America, because there's so little competition right now. Like Black Panther Wakanda Forever has been out for like 6 weeks. People are craving something new, and all we have right now is fucking Puss in Boots or like some really small kind of specialty films. But for people who like seeing blockbusters and like seeing movies that you can take the whole family to, although heaven help you if you take some small kids to this movie is long. But I think there is a real pent-up desire to go to the movies right now that I wouldn't be surprised at all if it opens at 200 in America. And then where it'll stop, that's the real riddle, because we don't know what's going to go down in China. Obviously, China played a huge role in the success of the first one, and China's still going through like crazy lockdowns and that sort of thing. But if this movie were to wrap up its theatrical run around 1.5 billion worldwide, that would seem to me like a home run success given the current movie-going climate. So without any real analytical expertise on this front, that's just my gut telling me where I think the movie will kind of settle. But before I wrap up this video, how does this movie compare to the rest of the filmography by James Cameron? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rank all of the films that he's directed, not films that he's produced, because we'd be here all day. But in terms of the films that he's directed, and if you disagree with my opinion, by all means, make your own list. This is my list, and I'm allowed to pick whatever the hell I want. So I'll say my least favorite of the films that he's directed are his underwater exploration documentaries, which are Aliens of the Deep and Ghosts of the Abyss. I get the two kind of confused. I know one's about creatures and the other's about Titanic, but I believe I liked Aliens of the Deep more than the other, but I really don't remember either of them that well. And then I'll go into his feature film debut, Piranha 2, which he actually wasn't even supposed to direct. He took over the reins after somebody else bailed. But what's funny about Piranha 2, it has so many ingredients that you would see in his later movies, where like, between the actors and their vocations and what they do, you can definitely see James Cameron's fingerprints, even if it was not necessarily like a James Cameron film. But as far as a true James Cameron film is concerned, next on my list would be his short film Xenogenesis, which once again, like Piranha 2, you can see so much of his later DNA as a director on display in that early short film. But now let's get into the real meat of his career with his 8 feature films that people kind of know and love as the James Cameron movies. So for my number 8, I'm going to go with Titanic. My sister would cut my throat for that because she saw it 13 times in the theater. But it's not for me. And then I would put Avatar right after that. I don't think Avatar is as good as Avatar 2. Once again, I think it'll be more popular, but Avatar was for me all spectacle, but very little substance, like empty calories. Really fun empty calories, but empty calories. Then for my number 6, I'll go with Avatar: The Way of Water, for all the reasons that I just articulated earlier in my review. And for the remaining 5, I'm just going to go with his hot streak from the time of Terminator through True Lies. It was a very easy time to be a James Cameron fan, and I grew up watching all these movies on repeat. I have no idea how many times I've watched all these movies. Many. But for my number 5, I'd go with The Abyss. For my number 4, I'd go with T2. My number 3, going with True Lies. People sleep on True Lies, but it's so fucking funny in the middle, and I think oftentimes James Cameron forgets the value of great comedy in his movies that otherwise can be very serious and very dour. For my number 2, I'm going with the original Terminator. Obviously, the special effects are nowhere near on the level of T2, but I feel like all the world building, all the storytelling, it's all there in Terminator, and it's got incredible style, incredible mood. And my favorite would be Aliens, which I've seen who knows how many times, and I will continue to watch it, but when it comes to combining horror, sci-fi, and action, it has no equal.
Get away from her, you bitch!
That's all I've got on Avatar: The Way of the Water. And once again, I'm hoping this movie wildly outperforms expectations. I hope people like it way more than I did. The movie business needs a win, and it needs a big win. This is one of the worst years ever when it comes to the theatrical movie-going experience. And I feel like the movie industry in a lot of ways is in a massive transition period where it needs to reinvent itself. And it needs visionaries like James Cameron where they're going to break new ground technologically, but also create their own worlds, their own stories. So I hope that this movie makes all the money that everybody hopes it'll make. But before I wrap this up, I've got to bring you a word from Manscaped, the official sponsor of my podcast, Wrong Reel. It's never too early to play holiday music, and it's never too early to start thinking about gifts, whether it's for a friend or the friends in your pants. You can make this a season to be jolly with Manscaped. Do your little drummer boy a favor and use the Lawnmower 4.0 to avoid another silent night in the bedroom. Then add in Manscaped's top-of-the-line shower products to have the people thinking, all I want for Christmas is you. If I had some courage, I would sing that line, but I'm a little tone deaf. But Santa cares about a sack, and so should you. Look nice when you get naughty by going to manscaped.com and using the discount code WRONGREEL in all caps for free shipping and 20% off. Inside, you'll find the Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer, Crop Preserver ball deodorant, Crop Reviver toner, Performance boxer briefs, and a travel bag to hold your goodies. Think of it as the perfect package for your package. So thanks for listening to my rant. Hope you enjoyed it. Please consider subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell, liking the video. And if you want to talk more, give me a shout on Twitter at Geeking Out. But I can't wait to hear what everybody else thought about the flick. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.